Good morning. I always hate to be the one breaking up great conversation. Good morning. All right. I'm Kelly Kuhn. I'm the president and CEO of the Michigan Nonprofit Association, and I am delighted to welcome you all to our event today. I'm here with president and CEO of the Council of Michigan Foundations. I always like to give them new titles and new names when we're together. My friend, longtime friend, Kyle Caldwell. This is our first ever co-hosted Civic and Community Engagement Summit. And I had an opportunity when I was kind of just walking around the room to talk to a lot of you, and you are really, really excited about being here, and we are just as excited to have you here, so thank you. Together with our colleagues in Michigan's charitable sector, we support nonprofits, philanthropy, and the communities we all work alongside.
So this is an important gathering of leaders in philanthropy and the nonprofit sector and community, all together to discuss ways we can deepen and advance our new efforts to center community voice and build the quality of life for Michiganders, especially those who are often unheard, unseen, and often overlooked. We know that we can all thrive in healthy communities when everyone's voice and engagement is heard and welcomed and valued.
Civic and community engagement is work that is critical every day, not just in an election cycle. In January, we will have a new presidential administration, a new Congress, and new members of our state legislature amid the backdrop of deep polarization in our country. One of the important ways we can address polarization is to ensure more voices are involved in civic participation. We are here today to collectively explore the leadership roles we can play here in Michigan to increase civic engagement. And speaking of engagement and speaking about building community, there are several opportunities in addition to all of what you are already doing, which is connecting with each other and the breakout sessions and the great content that's going to be presented today. But there are opportunities for you to engage with us. We've got two things and a couple things in the back of the room. Many of you may not have had the opportunity to explore that yet. We're talking about building a collage together. We want to hear your feedback. There is some great opportunities for you to tell us and to engage, and building community starts today.
So today we're going to learn together about some important work underway across the state that centers community voice and builds coalitions and communities, make communities the decision makers in shaping more equitable solutions. These serve as a clear and insightful examples of ways to advance civic engagement as we're defining them here. And we'll hear about a range of approaches to dive into meaningful community engagement and that foster active citizenship and that center our sector and that we can support and guide and advance in communities across Michigan.
Today, you will be equipped with tools and resources to take back to your own organizations to explore how you can best advance community engagement strategies in particular for equitable and transformative change. We are grateful you are here and for these important, actionable, future-focused conversations. Thank you to our speakers who will share insights and resources to support us all in our work in 2025 and beyond. And a special thank you to the M&A and CMF members, yay, members, and board members, woohoo, that's right, who are here with us today. We are also thrilled to host this event here in Durfee's Innovation, with the Durfee Innovation Society. And you're gonna hear more from a team member of Durfee about this amazing place that we are in the building. There is a ton of energy and action happening in this building. It is also home to many nonprofits working to support local families.
So we're going to get started. In the first keynote presentation that we're going to have, we're going to be joined by Dr. Jeff Williams. Sorry, Jeff, I got to get the PhD in there. By the way, congratulate Jeff on his recent accomplishment in reaching his PhD, so congratulations. Jeff is the Director of Consulting Services at the Dorothy A. Johnson Center for Philanthropy at Grand Valley State University. And for those who may not be aware, the Johnson Center serves as an incredible resource to our sector and to Michigan and nationally. Thank you to the Executive Director, Dr. Leslie Slavitt, and her team for their engagement alongside us in all of this work. And this morning, Jeff is going to share an analysis of the election results. He's going to forecast generally and the potential policy changes coming in 2025, and discuss what what these could mean to our sector. And he's going to deliberately focus on the future trends and the future things for us to think about, and less about the actual election outcome and results. So as you're thinking about the civic engagement work that we want to do broadly, think about some of the future casting that Jeff is going to share with us. So with no further ado, Jeff Williams.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Kelly. Well, I'm going to give you all the benefit of about 30 to 45 seconds while I have to switch some computer wires and get things ready to go. But I do want to start by just saying it's much more pleasurable for me to be speaking in Detroit post-election than the last time I gave a speech, which was 2016. About a week after the election to I think it was the Detroit Advocacy Caucus of the Michigan Nonprofit Association, I walked into a room of 16 or 20 CEOs of nonprofits who all looked like I'd run over their dog on the way in, if you remember 2016. So times have changed. We're a little bit later. So I wanted to refocus this presentation today on, we'll do a little bit about the election, just kind of ground everyone, but mostly looking forward. What can we expect? What did we learn about the electorate? If we're talking about civic engagement and civil society, we have to talk about Vox Populi. We have to talk about the voice of the people, which came through in some very clear ways 2 weeks ago. So let me take about 60 seconds, I'll flip things over, and then we'll get started. All right, and here's where I pray to the gods of the internet. Whew. So far, so good. All right, so in some respects, what happened 2 weeks ago is what we had been told to expect. Expect a nail biter. It's going to go down to the wire, and especially with the change in the last 100 days that kind of nobody had on their bingo card. In other respects, it was a very unusual result in that we didn't expect one candidate, either one, to basically run the table, to get most of the demographic groups, to get all 7 swing states. So we had this kind of election which was a little, manic or kind of flipped back and forth. It was kind of what we expected and not what we expected. So for Democrats, this is probably the most painful election loss since Bush over Dukakis in '98. And again, these little factoids that come up, if you're on the Democratic side or the left side, you're left kind of wondering, how could Vice President Harris lose an election where in the recorded history of the United States, she is number 5 in the number of total votes received? She got more votes for president than anyone else in history except 2 other people, 2 times. And those 2 other people are Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So Vice President Harris got more votes for president than Hillary Clinton. She got more votes for president than Barack Obama. And yet we had this election result. So again, Jeff Williams with the Johnson Center. I spent a long time and a long career in public policy. From 1998 through 2018, every 2 years, being a news junkie, I was in a newsroom doing on-air commentary about elections. So I took a lot of this election and really want to look at kind of what do we know and where are we going? And I intentionally chose that title, like what happened with the ellipses or the exclamation point, because depending on where you sit, you could either say, well, that happened, and kind of that's the ellipses, kind of be deflated, like don't really know what happened, or you're excited, well, that happened. We'd had change in the American electorate. Before we dive in, I'd just like us all to remember how weird the 2024 election was, right? A one-term president decides to run again after an interim term. That hasn't happened in over 100 years. 2 presidential candidates with active criminal cases against them or a close family member, that's not usual. We had a candidate who made it past all the primaries, was standing 107 days ahead of the general election and says, nope, I don't think so. That hasn't happened since Johnson. We had assassination attempts, and unfortunately have to use the plural. Like, that shouldn't happen. Yeah, that's the title of my speech. Well, this all happened. So a very strange election. So what I want to do this morning is offer 15 thoughts. 2 about the election, 5 about what we know about nonprofit, or what we know about the electorate, since we're talking civic engagement, and then 8 thoughts about kind of what comes next. Where are we as a sector? Where are we as a state looking at and trying to make sense of all these changes? So, because we learned some things, I'm going to ask you all, if you'd be so willing, I'm going to ask you to 5 times in the presentation, tell me what you think you know. So this is our practice slide. Just a nice, easy poll. If you can take out your cell phone, do the QR code, go to that website. We're going to start with a nice, easy question. True or false? Saudi Arabia, yep, do we need to move the, I'll stand over here. Saudi Arabia produces more oil than the United States and Russia, more oil than any other nation. True or false? You're correct, it is false. Saudi Arabia is actually number 3 in current oil production. What I wanted to do with this is just to make sure you got the Slido up and get started, but also the 5 other questions I have are going to kind of test your knowledge of where we're truly at right now. Because as Mark Twain said, it's never the things that you know that get you in trouble, it's the things that you know for sure that aren't is where the bear trap lies, right? So we're going to test that at a couple different points in the presentation to see if you've kind of kept up with where America is. So with that, let's go in. 7 thoughts about the electorate. It was a change election. So my big thought number 1, stealing from Maya Angelou, when the electorate shows you who they really are, believe them. It was a change election. And again, in keeping with the weird theme, it was a change election with essentially 2 incumbent candidates. Think about that for a moment. It's really kind of hard to have a change election when you have 2 people who have either occupied the office of the president or the office of the vice president. It's a little strange. Since 2006, actually, every presidential election has flipped the party. It's been a change election. I am old enough to remember that, and for some of you on the younger side, that may seem like every election should change election. I'm old enough to remember when folks like Tip O'Neill controlled the House of Representatives. The Democrats had control of the House of Representatives in the United States for 40 years, ending in 1996. So the period that we're in, where it kind of feels normal from modern standards, judged against the history, is not a modern thing. It's as convoluted or as variable as the Democrats holding the House for 40 years was unusual and stable. This election was about the economy. It dominated all the other issues. People who said the economy was their number 1 issue, that number 2 issue for them was 2 or 3 times below the economy. Said another way, the economy was 3 times as important as whatever people said was the number 2 issue. And that was true across the board. This chart shows the US overall and then some key swing states. The darker bar is 2020. The lighter bar is 2024. And you can see in every one of these states, United States, Georgia, Pennsylvania, the share of people saying the economy was the biggest issue is demonstrably higher in 2024 than it was just 4 years prior. Peggy Noonan's a columnist in the Wall Street Journal. She actually kind of hinted at this in September, 2 months ahead of the election. She said this will be a path election, not a person election. And that was seen as a very bold statement when you had 2 very clear candidates with 2 very different worldviews running. It seems kind of counterintuitive to say it's not really about either one of them as people, it's about the path that the nation was on. But if you had to take one picture of the election, this is that picture. This is the path that people had in their minds. Even though inflation has been relatively steady from the beginning to the end of this chart at 2 to 3%. And in all of my economics classes, we are taught that long-run inflation runs about 2.9 to 3%, meaning it was the historical average. We do have this little Mount Everest, right, called the recession caused by the pandemic. So in voters' minds, they really focused on the peak of that chart as what was ailing America, even though where we're at today, inflation is back to where it was under the Trump administration, round 1. Thought number 2, the electorate took a right turn at Albuquerque. And again, if you're of a certain age and you, like me, you grew up watching Saturday morning cartoons, you remember Bugs Bunny was always talking, I see a couple of heads nodding, the left turn at Albuquerque. For the head that was nodding for your bar trivia later tonight, do you know why Bugs Bunny was always reminding himself to take a left turn at Albuquerque? Do you know where that phrase came from? Route 66 dead ends in Albuquerque and goes to the left, but many people took a right and got lost. So the left turn at Albuquerque is actually, if you're on Route 66 and you're in Albuquerque, that's where the left is. There's your bar trivia. See, it's not just about the electorate and civic engagement, it's also about winning bets at the bar. So the electorate took a right turn at Albuquerque. What do I mean by a right turn? Well, here's Michigan. This is the difference between Democrats. So if you add all the Democratic votes up and subtract all the Republican votes, kind of which way did that needle move? In 2016, it's a very, very, very slight lean in Michigan toward the Democratic side, or toward the Republican side, excuse me. 2020, you can see what we clearly swung to the Democrats as a state in 2020. 2024, personally, being a Michigan born and bred, I think this is a picture of, two deer were on the road and I went this way and then I went that way, and, right? We recognize this, right? So the electorate moved in a big way in Michigan. And the bigger point, across the board, it went right. So, soccer moms in one of the presidential elections the last 20 years, that was a kind of a Macomb County thing. That's what swung elections to the Republican or Democratic side, was kind of suburban women characterized or stereotyped by Macomb County, Oakland County. There was not a single group that we can point to and say, oh, this election was about this group doing something different. Across the board, things shifted rightward. Wayne and Kent counties to the right by 6.8%. Major suburbs, 3.8%. Medium metro areas, smaller and rural areas, right, 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 right. In fact, this is how right it went. County map of the United States, the length of the arrows is by how much it swung. The color of the arrows is swung Republican or Democrat. If you watched any election night coverage or read anything in the news in the next couple of days, you've probably seen this map, right? They helpfully circled the 3 blue areas. 1, 2, and maybe a little bit somewhere around New York. But that's how far everything went across the country. Kind of hard to see on a county level map, so let's do the same thing on a state level. This is the story of the 2024 election. Not a single state shifted toward the Democrats, period. Think back to that first slide. This was an election about the economy. Just one more statistic about the economy and voters that helps prove that rightward shift. Trump was plus 12, meaning he had 12% more votes than his opponent among working class, non-college voters in 2024. Trump's margin in 2020 was plus 4. Up 12 today, it was plus 4 years ago. Obama in 2012 with that same group, plus 67. Working class, non-college voters who 2-to-1 went for Obama in 2012 ran about 70 points the other direction by 2024. Andrew Sullivan, writing in the Times of London 3 days before the election, said the following. And so you can almost hear the tectonic plates shift. In American foreign policy, it's beginning to return to its isolationist roots. On immigration, it's entering one of the most restrictive periods, as it did a century ago for 4 decades. Culturally, it's a nation that remains at war with itself, a cauldron of conflict and a brush fire of free speech, with both the Trump and the far right and the far left still bullying the center. So that was it in terms of the election results. Like I said, only 2 slides, just kind of ground you. It was an across-the-board rightward shift across all states, and there were some commentators who kind of saw this coming. Like, it shouldn't surprise us when we look at the bigger arc of history. It was an election about the economy. So let's pivot now and talk about some other themes that came from the electorate and kind of that civic engagement mindset that came into focus during this election. Number 3, record-setting money in this election, just not quite the way we all expected it. presidential elections are notorious for kind of innovations in modern running for office. 1936 was the first time we actually did a survey instead of straw polls. 1960, the famous Kennedy-Nixon TV debate. 1996 was the first time you could actually make a political donation via the internet. Just 18 years ago was the first political ad on Facebook. 2012, the Obama hug, do you remember that? Almost broke the internet, being shared a lot. And 2024 is kind of the show me the money election. So this is our second question. In the show me the money election, where did Democrats, we're just going to focus on one party, where did Democrats spend the most money to try to win a US Senate seat? Was it in Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Montana, or Texas? Where did Democrats spend the most campaigning for US Senate? Give me a couple more seconds here. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Montana, or Texas? Raw dollars we're talking about. All right. Well, here's where the wisdom of the crowds goes wrong. It was not Pennsylvania. It was not Michigan. It was not Texas. Ladies and gentlemen, in the state of Montana, there are just over 1 million people. We are just shy of 10 million here in the great state of Michigan. And twice as much money was spent in the Montana Senate race as there was in the Slotkins-Rogers race. So whatever you feel about the number of political ads you saw in the last 6 months, remember, there's a group of people, the definition of to decimate is to reduce by a power of 10. You can decimate Michigan's population to arrive at Montana. We're 10 million, they're 1 million, and they had twice as much spending. So when I said, yes, this was a big money election, but it didn't kind of go the way we thought. Now, overall, yeah, the big states got big money. You can see where Republicans were really defending, but a lot of the money didn't go the way we thought it would. One of the biggest examples of that is in kind of the extra spending. Yes, so this is spending, Kamala Harris on the top, Donald Trump on the bottom. Their direct money is the first bar, so you can see, yes, Vice President Harris outraised Trump almost 3-to-1 in direct contributions. Again, think about that. She had 105 days. I'm not going to count her first day when she found out now she's the nominee. I'm going to take that one out. So it wasn't 106, it was 105. I'm going to take out election day too. So she had 104 days, and she almost tripled the money that went directly to the Donald Trump campaign. But look on the other side, the outside money side, the second two bars, very close. Indeed, if you total everything up at the federal level, this was about a $16 billion election. 4 years ago, it was an $18.5 billion election. This election was actually cheaper than 4 years ago. That was also a surprise. Other surprises were, again, this outside money. The Trump campaign effectively outsourced its get out the vote activities to Elon Musk. And Elon Musk's crew, since again, it's a private advocacy organization, like we don't know exactly how they deployed the money. The rumors are that they really focused on direct advertising to get out low incidence voters. Like that was kind of their secret plan, was to go at people who don't regularly vote in an election. Again, knowing what we know now, was that the reason for the victory? No. See again, rightward shift, economy is the biggest issue, but it certainly played a role. And one of the biggest ways it played a role is thought number 4, non-traditional outreach. Spotify and Apple, between them, have 70% of the podcast market. I'll give you a forecast. We have just lived through, not the first election with a computer, not the first election with a political ad on Facebook. We just lived through the first podcast election. And I'll show you why in just a second. But 70% of the market in podcasts is just between Spotify and Apple. Of the top 5 podcasts on each of those platforms, how many are produced by a traditional media platform, one of the big corporations you'd recognize, versus a single individual or a team across both platforms? Is it one of the top 5 is by a large company, 3 of the top 5, or all of the top 5? Looks like about 20, 30 more people to vote, so I'll leave it here for a second. How many of the top 5 were produced by a media company versus an individual or team of individuals? And here we're getting close to the 2024 election. It's a nail biter between 1 and 2. The answer is 1. Only The Daily from the New York Times is in the top 5 of both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. The other 4 shows are things like Joe Rogan. They're individuals or teams. So, and again, you can argue that The Daily doesn't count because while it's sponsored by the New York Times, it's really a small team of reporters at the New York Times. So I will accept the answers of 0 or 1 as being correct, depending on how you want to argue. But that's what we have seen. I just want you to linger on this for a second. Joe Rogan, 11 million listeners per episode. If I went on Meet the Press, Face the Nation, State of the Union, Fox News Sunday, and George Stephanopoulos, ABC This Week, if I went on all 5 of those television shows, I would reach 9.5 million. This is huge. Trump reached more potential male voters with his 3-hour Rogan conversation at 33 million downloads over the first 72 hours than he could have with a dozen appearances on the mass media. Kamala Harris wasn't clueless about this. She did the Call Her Daddy podcast. She reached more women in that single Call Her Daddy podcast than she could have reached on 60 Minutes and The View combined. We have just lived through the first podcast election. So professor of media and marketing at Stern at New York University, Scott Galloway, who says Rogan has 16 million Spotify subscribers. The audience just from a single download is about 11 to 12 million. That is more than the 3 million of most of those news shows you see in that graphic on the left. To reach as many people as he did on Rogan, it would have been 3 separate 1-hour conversations or all 5 for multiple times. Because remember, the total Rogan downloads after 72 hours, 30 million. Galloway goes on to note that when we're talking about mass media versus podcasts, the correct comparison is apples to cocaine. That's where we're at. But he goes further. He says it's not just the number of eyeballs. And this, to me, this is, again, all of us learned something out of this election. This is the median age of the US audience in 2024. So this isn't aged data, this is this year's data. Let us remember our middle school statistics for a moment. What's the definition of a median? Even more than the middle, that exact point in the middle where half of the data has more and half of the data has less. It's different than an average, right? Because if the median and average are separated, it means that there's an outlier pulling that average away from the median, right? So the median is where half have more and half have less. The median age of someone who watches cable news is 70. Folks, remember your number line. Half of the people over age 70, and half of the people under age 70? That's a little skewed, right? Okay, we'll go to primetime TV. The median age is 65. Newspapers, 60. Talk radio, 58. Magazines, 52. Podcasts, 34. If you are a nonprofit trying to reach an audience of families, parents with young children, should you advertise on cable news or get a hit on cable news or be interviewed on cable news? By show of hands, tell me where's the market I should look at if I'm trying to place my nonprofit's message. Yeah, like it's somewhere behind the curtain, right? If I'm trying to reach families with young children, podcasts is basically the place I should be advertising or getting my executives onto. The rest, it's nice, but it should not be one of my top 5 priorities if we're being very cold-hearted about it. This rise in alternative networks makes sense when you think about overall trust. I grew up in a generation, I was talking with Kyle earlier and Kelly, I grew up of a generation where I could tell you the exact moment that evening began. And it was not when the street light, singular, came on in my neighborhood. It was around 6:56 p.m. when you heard the words, "And that's the way it is." Right? Walter Cronkite. That was the mark of when the evening actually began. It was after the 6:30 newscast. This is Gallup polling. How much do you trust the media? Green line is trust a great deal or a fair amount. Gallup stopped polling this in 1976 because the needle never moved. Media was always trusted by 70 or 80% of the population. The next time they asked the question was 20 years later when they realized, the needle moved. Let me say that again. Gallup found this question so boring they didn't ask it for 20 years. And look at where we are now. Trust in the media is down by half compared to the Walter Cronkite, Tom Brokaw era of television. Peter Jennings as well, just to give you equal time. So when you see that now it's actually trust in the media is below sometimes I trust and never trust, podcasts make a lot more sense, right? Suddenly it's not this kind of overnight thing that happened that podcasts came out of nowhere. No, this has been a 20 and 30-year decline of trust in a singular voice of media and the advent of technology. Number 5, our reality distortion machine has really kicked into overdrive. Remember when the New York Times said that Ted Cruz was in trouble in Texas? He won by 1 million votes, by the way. I don't know your definition of trouble, but when your margin is 1 million votes, I don't think you were ever in trouble of losing an election. So here's a visual. I welcome you to scribble this down or take a quick picture. There are many sources out there that kind of show the bias of media or kind of what the perceptions are. This just happens to be the all sides media bias chart. I want to make 2 points about this. One is, if you are a nonprofit or foundation or association executive, and you kind of print this out at home and circle the places you most frequently get your news, and too many of your places are in the same 1 or 2 columns, that you don't have a diet across all 5 columns, it's time to adjust your media diet. That you can have an entire, someone may think they're being very distributed with their reading when they're looking at The Atlantic, The Huffington Post, and MSNBC. And the answer is nope, you are tracked in one of those. So if you're an executive that has to talk to the public, you should probably have at least a couple of sources in each of these columns. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is, if there's one sentence I need to encapsulate where we are in America right now, it's this one. Okay, all sides media bias chart. The second sentence below says, and I quote, ratings do not reflect accuracy or credibility. Folks, we're looking at a media bias chart that says it does not show anything about accuracy or reliability or credibility. What are we measuring then? Bias of what? If you're not showing me accuracy, credibility, or reliability, then what? So I both love this chart and hate this chart at the same time. That's kind of a mental map of the universe, and there are many different versions of this chart. There are 4 or 5 from reputable sources. Pick any one of them, but again, check your media diet, do a little diagnostic, and see how you fall against those categories. True or false? Most state and national polls, especially in the 30 days ahead of the election, accurately measured this election. True or false? Most state and national polls, especially in the last 30 days, accurately predicted this election. All right, anyone that said false, why do you say false? What was false about those polls to you? I'm sorry? Okay, so they had a different person ahead by 2 or 3 points, and therefore when it was the other person ahead by 2 or 3 or more points, that's proof the poll was wrong. Perfectly reasonable and absolutely inaccurate conclusion. But yes, Right, that's what we all saw. What we read in the media was exactly that. It's Kamala by 2, it's Trump by 2. That's what the media was saying, but all of those are based on polls, and polls have a margin of error. And the margin of error for most election polls is between 3 and 5%. So if you need half plus 1 to win, and the answer is 52, and it could swing 5 points in either direction, then what the media should have been saying is one of two things. Either it's a tie race, because the margin of error covers both Trump winning and Kamala Harris winning, or they should have said it's a 2 in 3 chance that Harris will win because more of that, think of that bell curve, more of that curve is on her winning than on Trump winning. So the media, once again, the media badly talked about polls because Americans are bad with math as a general statement. But the polls actually did very well with some notable outliers like the Iowa poll. There were some notable outliers in either direction. So just a really quick math case to do this is from Nate Silver's blog, but it's a great one. Out of 80,000 simulations, Harris won in 40,012. So he ran an election simulation, basically doing a bunch of different variables, ran it 80,000 times. And of those 80,000 times, Vice President Harris won only in 12 more than in Trump. These are the odds after 10,000 rounds, who is more likely to win? 20,000 rounds, 30,000 rounds. In mathematics, the more that you do something, the more that you model it, the more you kind of get to the permanent natural state. And the permanent natural state was, this is a tie race. Thanks, math, for telling us what we already knew, but visually I wanted to show you this is what it was. It was that nail-bitingly close, and that's also what the polls said. So again, were the polls correct? Yes, and again, another innovation, you could have bet on it. So we could have literally bet on the election results with 1 or 2 sites. Legally, you could have bet on 2 sites. Illegally, you could have bet on 4 more. Number 7, let's also talk about our youngsters. If you were born in 1994, let's do a This Is Your Life. Oh, I say, all right, 1994. We have someone who was born, a couple people born in 94. We're going to do This Is Your Life. When you were in kindergarten, it was the Columbine school shooting. 1st grade, the 9/11 terror attacks. 5th grade, congratulations, we gifted you social media. Let us know how that works out. 7th grade, don't worry, social media is so good, we're going to put it in a device that sits in your pocket called the smartphone. 9th grade, starting to think about career or college, we're going to gift you with the Great Recession. Ferguson hits when you're either 2 years into college or 2 years into the workforce. Right about the time you're thinking of starting a family, we throw a bunch of hurricanes with devastating impact. And then when you're 26, maybe you're finally settling down, maybe you're finally getting serious about family. Don't worry, we'll just shut down the world for COVID. Do you understand some of the disaffection, potentially, of the youth? Another comment during our impromptu break was, this kind of rightward swing, is the electorate off base, or is there something true here? And I said, well, kind of 2 answers to that. One is I can give you a pair of glasses that says they're off base, because the economy is actually doing very well, measured by historical standards. But I can also give you a pair of glasses that shows that, something's not working for us is a real thing. Like maybe it's taken to the extreme, but this is not an illegitimate sentiment of America's not working for me. And this is just like kind of one slice. So if the United States was a toddler that I was raising, I think we have reached the official point where my diagnosis of the nation is, in summary, the nation needs a nap. You're not quite making sense. I don't know that you want to make that. I don't know that that was the best decision. Let's put you down to sleep for a little bit and come back in an hour and let's try to paint again. Right? I think that's where we're at. What's interesting, and you all know I didn't put these statistics in, you know them well. Trust in American institutions is down. Trust in media is down. Trust in Congress is down. Down, 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 down. Here's the interesting part. This is measuring your trust in the military, the judicial system, the national government, and the honesty of elections. In other words, the core building blocks of a functional democratic society. Only in the United States has trust in those 4 institutions gone down in the last 30 years. Other Western developed nations, or part of that Western bloc, that faith and confidence has gone up. So there is something, like I said, those 2 pairs of glasses, are they, is that sentiment off base, or are they tapping into something? They're tapping into something. We're the only nation in the world where we think things are getting worse, where other nations think things are getting better. The nation needs a nap. What's next for nonprofits? I think where nonprofits are at is we need to, while the nation is napping, we need to have a new national anthem. And it'll be from Bachman Turner and Overdrive. Some of you are already laughing. You ain't seen nothing yet. And proving that the internet also has a sense of humor, I put in humorous take on You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet images to Google, and got this. This is not AI. This is actually the cover of a book called You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, Music and Photography. Boy, doesn't this just capture how some of America is feeling? There's this elephant leaping up from a red room and two people cowering in the corner. That's kind of where some people think we are. So we ain't seen nothing yet, and that's exactly where we are. On the policy menu in Washington and in Lansing right now, especially Washington, don't worry, the federal budget expires in a month. So if you're Speaker Johnson, what do? Do you punt it until do you try to pass a continuing resolution now, which means President Biden has to sign it and you have to get it through a Democratic Senate? Okay. Or do you punt it till right after January 1? Interesting fact, the Senate becomes Republican on January 1st and 2nd, but Biden is still president until later in the month, so you have to get it through a Republican House or Republican Senate, but a Democratic president. Or do you punt something until March, April, May, sometime later? Raging debate going on about this right now in Washington. But that's not the only debate, because our debt limit expires on January 1. And TCJA, Tax Cuts and Job Act of 2017, originally signed in by President Trump, had a clock on it. And that clock says these tax cuts are permanent until the end of 2025, and then they revert. In those cuts are, should we expand or shrink the child tax credit? Should we change the standard deduction back down to where it was? Should we eliminate the limitation on the state and local tax deduction? Probably not a big deal here in Michigan, a very big deal in California and New York, New Jersey. Are we going to change the tax rates on individuals, corporations, or both? And do we exempt some types of income? In the proposals from the Trump campaign, we're eliminating taxes on tips, overtime, and Social Security payments. What I want to draw your attention to here from the nonprofit perspective, especially about TCJA, is some things in TCJA are good for nonprofits and philanthropy, and we should fight to keep them in force. Some things in TCJA are not good for philanthropy, and we would fight to repeal them. So we can't just have a knee-jerk reaction to, are we for or against the Trump tax cuts? It kind of depends which cut and what are we talking about. So it's going to get messy, and you ain't seen nothing yet. In addition, even if you're thinking as a nonprofit or foundation, well, we don't directly, the tax cuts really don't affect us. We don't pay taxes other than payroll for a nonprofit or a foundation, some really special taxes on your endowment. Yeah, you don't, but these top three things really affect your donors. So whether you're directly affected by the tax changes or indirectly, we should be paying attention as a sector to this rewrite. And all of that is before we talk about any of these. Changes to NATO, changes to regulatory policy, tariffs, border security, free speech on college campuses. Big picture for nonprofits in terms of the you ain't seen nothing yet. Three big takeaways. One, more than most presidents, what President Trump says is going to matter. He sets the agenda by his verbal in a way that many other presidents don't, so we'll have to pay attention. In that, I had blissfully forgotten how addicted to Twitter, news, social media, AP I was from 2016 to 2019 until he was elected president again, and suddenly I'm checking the news every hour because we need to know, what did he say an hour ago? Right? So there will be prepared for a frenzy or franticness to the news cycle that all of us will need to figure out how to handle. Notice I did not say how all of us are going to need to figure out how to react to. Come to that point in a second, but we need to figure out how to handle. And third, remember, and this is getting lost in a lot of the media, Trump is a lame duck president the moment he takes office. He's got maybe 18 months, maybe 2 years, and then he's going to have a Kamala Harris problem in the form of J.D. Vance, who I think wants to become president. I'm just guessing, I'm just spitballing. I think there might be some ambition in that person. How long do you think J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or the kind of that large bench on the Republican side is going to sit quietly when they know the boss has an exit date? We ain't seen nothing yet. We've covered this. Oh, and just one note about lame duck. We are technically in lame duck session right now, both in Michigan and federally. I've watched the legislature for a number of years. 2 out of 3 lame duck sessions, everyone says, oh, it's going to be, it's going to be active. No, everyone's ready to do things. And almost always that kind of fails or kind of disappears down the ether. We don't know how busy this lame duck session will be, and just think brush fires are going to pop up. Like, for example, Joan, what's that House bill that came, 94 what? 9495. 48 hours ago, the internet, the nonprofit internet blew up about House Resolution 9495 that says, it adds a provision that says the Secretary of the Treasury can, by a stroke of a pen, identify any nonprofit as a terrorist organization and basically take it off of the approved to do business with list. This is causing great consternation in the nonprofit sector. This is an example of something that can be slipped in during a lame duck session. A lot of things need to happen before that becomes law. And number 2, Treasury already has this power, folks. Remember how we can't deposit $10,000, like I do this all the time, we can't deposit $10,000 of cash without filling out a little form? You've heard that, you've seen movies. Okay, that's managed by FinCEN, the Financial Center on Crimes and Enforcement something or other. FinCEN right now can say, we think that deposit is suspicious, Chase Bank, customer 7, cut them off. So on one hand, yes, House Resolution 9495 is important, we should pay attention to it. On the other hand, this is available right now, so why the smoke and fury about this? If we as a sector choose to respond to everything that comes across the table, the frenzy will continue and we're really going to need a nap. Like, we can't keep that pace up. We're going to have to pick and choose what we respond to. That leads to my 9th. If we got to pick and choose, the battle of the future is between momentum and inertia. Or said another way, tech bros versus reality. Tech bros have a lot of great plans. $10.5 trillion in tax cuts. Here's TCJA alone, $4.6 trillion. We're going to add to that an expansion of the child tax credit. Hey, that sounds good from a nonprofit lens. Social Security exemption, change the corporate tax rate, exempt tips. This all sounds great. Tech bros. Just one problem. The total value over this time period of all non-defense discretionary spending is $9 trillion. The available money is 9, and they've proposed 10.5 of tax cuts. Tech bros meet reality. So as a sector, how in a yank should we be about the Trump tax cut proposals? And my answer is, I don't need to be in a yank at all because the balance sheet is going to school them. Now, am I ignoring it? No, there's still danger in those hills, but I don't need to worry about it because their math doesn't math. You can't get there from here. Let's surf the waves of popular opinion for my thought number 10. Each of the last elections has changed the world in terms of the political divide. But again, we can't stay at DEFCON 5 forever. We can't have every question be a democracy is on the ballot issue, or we're going to exhaust our donors and our supporters, and our staff and ourselves. So the new rules I would propose to stay afloat is remember that everything is politics. Everyone watches something sometimes, like there's no kind of hiding something quietly anymore. And most importantly, again, back to when I was growing up, there was the phrase in media or communications, if it bleeds, it leads, right? If it bleeds, it leads. You put it above the fold, you put it at the 6 o'clock or 6:01, you put it top on the newscast. I'm going to say if it's social media, we need to change that and tweak it. social media says if it provokes, we'll promote. Remember, what you see in your X or Threads or Snapchat or Facebook feed is not simply the last 30 things that got posted. An algorithm is picking and choosing from the universe of things that just got posted what you should see, separate from what you should see, separate from what you should see. So if it provokes you, if you engage with it in some way, you've told the algorithm, like a mouse getting the water or getting the pellet, I want more of this. That's a very different universe. We need to be thinking if it provokes, promote, and that's the universe we're putting our messages into. So with that as a backdrop, let's get out your phones again. There's another election in 4 years. So being good nonprofit advocates at an event, thinking of civic engagement, we want to start reaching those new voters now. So if in 4 years they're going to vote, I need to be targeting messages to 13 to 17-year-olds today to reach them in 4 years when they are a new voter. So put those 5 sites in order, top to bottom, from most popular to least popular among the teenage crowd. So I'm going to give you a little time on this one. You've got to look at those 5 popular social media sites, and you're going to pick the first, the second, the third, the fourth, the 5th most popular as you go down. All right, last 2, here we go. This is how you all have ranked them. You all have said TikTok is first, Snapchat, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. The actual answer is, so just repeating, you all had TikTok first. YouTube is the #1 platform. And again, your second bar trivia night winning question. The fastest growing podcast platform is YouTube. People are watching podcasts. Right. So if you are a nonprofit executive, and I'm going to leave everyone, I've got some good friends from Well Design and some others, and I know there's some great communications marketing people in the room. I am excluding you from this conversation because you already know this. But for the rest of us that have to market messages and we think, oh, I put it on Facebook, I've reached everyone. I want you to take away from this presentation that your mental map is a little out of date. You're not wrong to say it's better to be on Facebook than CNN. So points for being on Facebook, okay? But your mental map is a little old, especially when you start thinking about some different audiences. Facebook not only is 5th of 5, it is 1/3 the eyeballs of YouTube. So if you have a Facebook first strategy and you don't have a reason why you're doing that, you're basically giving up 2 of every 3 potential viewers of your message. That brings us to points 4 and 5. We've got to fight that battle and help people understand the difference between big existential choices and small choices. Everything can't be democracy on the ballot at all times, every time. And we have to go to where the eyeballs are, not where they used to be. I think that was Wayne Gretzky, the great political commentator, right? He skates to where the puck is going to be, not to where it is. The same thing in politics. We need to go to where the eyeballs are. Number 11, everything old is new again. We need to relearn some advocacy lessons. So, for Joan and Regina, this is their unpaid advertisement of a reminder that nonprofits can advocate. You can be involved in that political process. So keep that in mind. There are rules, yes. There are very different rules for private foundations, yes. But as a nonprofit, you absolutely can advocate. We all need to remember things that we should know. We need to remember the 4 Bs. We need to be bipartisan, because for the foreseeable future, you're going to have to talk to both parties. We need to be bi-level. The United States as a democracy has reserved all the powers to the state except those that were delegated back to the federal government. We have a very heavy involvement of states in our policy. If you are all Trump administration all the time, you are going to miss major changes at the state level and other places that could have more effect on your daily life as a nonprofit. Be bicameral. There is a House and a Senate, asterisk, except if you're in Nebraska, keep going unicameral. But for the 49 others of us, we need to be bicameral, bipartisan and bicameral. We just can't focus on one chamber. It takes two chambers to tango. And last, we got to remember to know our bureaucrats. There's a big distinction between what's in statute, what's law, and what's regulatory. Bureaucrats are in charge of the regulatory side. Whether you want to accelerate change or throw sand in the gears, the bureaucracy and the bureaucrats, the civil service, is where that happens. If you're only paying attention to your elected officials, you're missing a huge part of the policy landscape that you should be involved in. We're also changing how we vote. So, multiple choice question. What share of Michigan voters voted on election day? Being very precise with language here. What share of the electorate, I'm giving you 4 options, did 1 in 4, 1 in 3, half, or 2 in 3? What share of Michigan voted on election day? Click. 39%. Congratulations, as a group, you did exactly what I thought you would do, which is mean you got half of the poll questions correct and the other half you missed. This is one you got correct. 39% of the Michigan population did indeed vote on election day. An equal number voted absentee before election day. And a large blob did early voting. Meaning not absentee. They had to go to the polling place and vote, but they did that before election day. 2 in 3 Michigan voters now vote before election day. Another question during our impromptu break was, how much did voters, not politicians, or the redistricting commission affect Michigan politics? And I said, well, on one hand, too early to tell. We've had sea change elections before. I don't think that we can kind of declare political victory one way or the other, but it certainly broke the logjam in a lot of conversations. But the place where that ballot proposal really made a difference is in how Michiganders vote. No reason absentee voting is now a permanent fixture. Early voting, permanent fixture. So if you're engaged in the advocacy arena and you're not focusing on getting your message out in that kind of 6 to 8 weeks before the election, you're missing 2 in 3 voters. How and where Michigan voters are voting has changed. You need to pull that communications calendar forward. Number 12, the policy future belongs to Kenny Rogers. I mean, you could see that one coming, right? You got to know when to hold him, know when to fold him. So thinking of the bureaucrats, I just want to give you an example. I gave a speech 3 weeks ago, just before the election, to a group of teachers and superintendents, people involved in education policy. It was about how to talk to your legislator. I said, okay, we're going to do a scenario. Let's brainstorm for 20 minutes. We want to change the M-STEP. We're going to change the standardized test in Michigan. Write down all the different groups you can think of that would need to be involved in that conversation. After 20 minutes had gone by, I cut them off at number 257. So, when I say the future is inertia versus momentum, or tech bros versus reality, or propel versus throw sand in gears, I took 20 people off the streets that knew education policy, gave them a bogus scenario, and they came up with 257 people that needed to be involved in that conversation in 20 minutes. How many people do you actually think are involved in just that conversation? You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them, because we can't keep that level of effort up across everything. So 3 concluding thoughts as we wrap up, and here hopefully I uplift a little bit. First of all, in some respects, we've been here before. A dog talking to a cat, and the dog is saying, "Who are you kidding? You're all about small government until you get stuck in a tree." We're going to cut the Department of Education. Great. Sounds fine. Just one small question. All of your constituents that have student loans, who's going to answer their call? Oh, yeah. Not really worried about the Department of Ed being cut when there's somebody that needs to answer the phone on the other side. We'll see what happens. In other ways, we've literally been here before. Remember this picture from earlier? Remember this big bubble? This is the same picture, but instead of looking at inflation on a monthly basis, it's now on an annual basis. Same picture. I'm just doing a much longer period of history. Here's Trump, there's the pandemic. We have been here before in terms of inflation. This is inflation 1960 to the present. You know that inflation pandemic bump that we're all so in a yank about and fighting mad and eggs and milk? It's number 3 in post-World War II history of how bad inflation can get. It's number 3, people. There were 2 periods of larger inflation that we kind of have glossed over and forgotten. They were ugly. They also deposed a president in that time. President Carter lost, partly on inflation in the economy. But what we also forget is this big thing in the middle, this 30-year period where inflation really never got above 2.5% for 30-some years. Think about it this way. There are MBAs who graduated and work in finance, who graduated in 1994 and have never in their lives seen a 6% inflation rate or a 6% yield rate. They've worked a 30-year career where money was free. They say they don't know how to finance anything. They've never had to finance it. The interest rate was 1%. I remember, dating myself, when my dad took advantage of GM's 7.7. You remember that? In the 1970s and 80s, GM had a special where they were offering to sell new cars for 7.7% down. And he got a new car because 7.7 was an absurdly low interest rate. I remember the first car I bought, it was 3%, and it went to 3.5% when we got our second car, and it's like, I need to, where's my torch? Right? He was thrilled to get as low as 7.7. I was horrified to pay as much as 3.5. In the civic engagement side, second to last thought, it's about reminding ourselves of the benefits of pluralism, not pugilism. The United States was founded on, and its special place in the world is we have always allowed multiple ideas to compete for the public attention. What's our national motto? E pluribus unum, from many, one. So this feature that somehow we're fragmented, or it's the broken glass theory of the American public, our glass has been broken for 200 plus years. That was a feature, not a bug. But somehow we've let those differences become sticks or cudgels against the other side of the level it's not unseen before, but it's been a good 100 years since we've seen this level of rancor. And last, if you remember nothing else from this morning, please remember, land doesn't vote. This is not the accurate picture of sentiment in the United States. This is population. That's one color for each state. The nation doesn't look so red with tiny outposts of blue when we change it to say the nation is marbled. There's red and blue everywhere. Land doesn't vote. People do. Find where your people are and talk to them. That's where we're at, and that's where we need to be from a civic engagement perspective. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your patience with our impromptu. Looks like we did really good on time, so like 10 minutes or so for questions. I'm getting a thumbs up from Kelly, and we've got folks with microphones running around, so would love, and I'm slightly petrified to take your questions.
I've got a question. It's about the lame duck thing. I don't feel
raise
like,
your hand?
oh, here I am.
There you are.
My voice is usually larger, but it's small today. But Can you just say like a little bit more, like talk to me like I'm in second grade? Like, can you say more about the lame duck sessions? Because I don't understand it quite. And I might not be the only one.
No, that's fine. That's a really good point. So congratulations, you are now all members of the Michigan House of Representatives. I am the Speaker of the House, okay? And it is today. We've all just had an election. Some of you are saying goodbye. You lost. Some of you are saying goodbye because you're retiring or you hit term limits, so it's a happy loss. You'll get your celebratory speech at the end. Some of you are still really mad that you lost. The rest of you are really tired, right? You just ran an election campaign. You've been dialing for dollars for the last year. You've been up night in cold sweat worrying about that one thing I said off the cuff and humor. Did somebody capture that? And is it going to be the next attack ad that comes out tomorrow? You are tired. And it is November, whatever today is. And my job as Speaker is to say to all of you, I want you all to come back to Lansing on Tuesday because we're going to take some votes on some controversial stuff. Who's with me? Well, I saw one person raising her hand, but I think she was just scratching her ear. So basically, none of you are with me. I'm sorry. I'm the Speaker of the House. I demand that you all come and vote on important and controversial issues on Tuesday. Who's with me? Okay, now there's somebody fanning themselves in the back, so still nobody. That's a lame duck session. So in a lame duck session, they are still the legislature. There is still policy to be done, but everybody's tired. Nobody wants to be there. So sometimes in lame duck, when you know that the House is about to flip from Democrat to Republican, or vice versa, or here in Michigan, the Democrats are about to lose the trifecta. They have the governor, House, and Senate right now. Come January 1, they just have the governor and the Senate, right? The House flipped. So they lose some political sway after January 1. So sometimes in a lame duck, it's what can we hurry up and rush through, like House Resolution 9495, while we still have the power, or what waits till later. That's a lame duck session. So you can imagine that's why most of them don't go anywhere, is it's not any evil or ill intent, it's just the body's tired and they want to go home for Christmas, New Year's, Hanukkah, all the year-end holidays, and they don't want to come back to Lansing. Lame duck. You had a question?
Lamar Weir from the Song Foundation. So you talked about where the youth are on social media and how we should be targeting them going towards next election. I wonder, do you also have any data on the average age of voters? And maybe that's why people are still targeting some of those other media outlets, because those are the more people that go out to vote.
Yeah, and again, what we were kind of all taught, and again, that mental map we have is, seniors vote a lot. So we should, if anything, we should bias some of our media messaging toward cable news, toward the other places where more older voters are. What 2024 showed us is, yes, seniors still vote a lot, but there's a whole bunch of 30-somethings that just figured out where the ballot box was because, again, remember that slide of you were born in 94? Like, they're tired of that. So that kind of senior premium, it didn't completely go away, but it's much less important today than it was, and kind of the youth side is now up. So I would not target an older population. I would kind of look at where I'm spending and make sure if I am targeting older, I know why. That it's not a default choice, it's a strategy. Yes?
I have three things. One, what do you think about the idea that they're going to take TikTok away because people are out there crying and carrying on? Number two, the Instagram numbers, did they include Threads? Number three, what do you think about Blue Sky? And to everyone else, even though you are on social media, sharing your agency's posts and getting other people is absolutely free, and you could use those numbers to gain donors.
We'll take them in reverse order. Blue Sky is growing as an alternative. Its future, I think, is a little unknown. I'll say it this way. 4 years ago, a bunch of nonprofits, from very moral reasons, decided they were going to leave Twitter. And like that first half of that group, it was a very risky decision because we didn't know leave Twitter to what, right? There was a very unclear landscape. Today, the price of leaving Twitter, first of all, most people already have left, so you're kind of late. And second of all, you got plenty of options, so kind of the risk isn't there. So Blue Sky and others, if nothing else, have radically changed the choice of social media landscape compared to 4 years ago, simply because they exist. Does the Instagram number include Threads? That I do not know. My suspicion is no, because Threads is still so tiny. I think it's not in those top 5. I think it would be down a ways. Twitter still dominates that kind of fast hot take landscape to the tune of a 2, 3, or 4, or 5-fold over Threads and Blue Sky. That being said, both Threads and Blue Sky are growing exponentially faster than Twitter. So I expect those curves to cross very shortly here. And I forgot your first question. TikTok. Will TikTok go away? TikTok will not go away. Too many of our retirement funds have invested in people who have invested directly or indirectly in TikTok, so it will not go away. And for my retirement fund, thank you. From a practical standpoint, yes. I think the one interesting note from the results of this election is tech is really scared right now. The incoming Trump administration is not like bear-hugging tech like Republicans used to or should in the popular kind of political environment. They are very angry with Google and Facebook for perceived slights. So Google right now is highly likely to be in some way broken up or something sold, and that is not likely to be reversed under the Trump administration. TikTok is going to have to divest or do something, but it will still exist. So social media is not feeling too happy right now looking at their policy landscape. So, could it go away? Yeah, but I think more likely it'll have to be divested or something else. Two more. Yep, I was just going to say. All right, one here and one there. All right.
I'm wondering, do you think it is the demographic or age group that is the reason for the increase in views, or do you think it's more so because of the content? And what I mean by that is, I'm a young guy, born in '92, and I like traditionally, things that would be considered masculine activities. And on one side, you have all these podcasters who, are aligned with the right, who also are aligned with more masculine activities. Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, Dana White, right? All, the first two are UFC fighters, right? The PBD podcast. Whereas on the other side, you have a lot of more left-leaning content, for lack of the better word, that are full of whims. So I'm wondering, do you think it's that content demographic that leads to the increased engagement from young men in particular, or do you think it's just the whole age group in general?
I'm going to pick door number 3, which is lifestyle. That there are just so many more easily accessible media choices that when I go, and think back to that media bias chart, but let's put TikTok, Spotify, just all the different sources up there. When I suddenly have leisure time, I have so many more choices that I can pick. It's natural that I gravitate toward things that I like. Like you said, you like fishing, whatever, hunting, deer season. So I like hunting. All right, well then you're going to gravitate toward podcasts that have hunting. That doesn't mean that I chose that content, because I'm going back one choice to say, why were you even looking for the content? Is I had spare time and I was tired of playing Xbox. Or I had spare time and I didn't want to go see mom again, whatever. But it's the convenience, it's a lifestyle side. Then I think those come in. Remember too that as soon as I encounter that first social media and say I like hunting, what do you think my feed is suddenly going to be composed of? So think of this more of, we don't recognize the weight of that first choice. I think it's another great example. I have no idea why, but my CNN, New York Times, like national news media, so all that comes from that advertising universe, thinks I'm in the market for a puppy. I don't know why. All I can figure out is the last time my son was home for college, he was Googling humane societies to help a friend who was getting a puppy. And he did it on my computer, on my login, and now I'm getting puppy ads. Okay, so does that mean I am interested in a puppy, or did the algorithm go bump in the night? So this is where I also wouldn't go as far out on that plank, because we just don't know. My son could have just been using my computer to find a puppy, and now I'm getting hunting or fishing or camping websites.
Yes.
Question.
Yep. Norman Clement, Detroit Change Initiative. Talking about the trends, my only question with that is that some of those trends, especially in the battleground states, I'm looking at, for example, North Carolina, where the top of the ticket lost, and then the Senate races went toward the left. So I know the question is about the economy, but there are some factors that were a little bit more than the economy. Some of those states have reproductive freedom bills that, outside of Florida, overwhelmingly pass. And so seems like there's a lot of effort of ticket splitting. And so with your ticket splitting, there has to be something a little bit more questionable for a voter to go in and saying, judging the candidate outside of just the economy. So that's my, I want to speak to that, like,
Yeah, so
those trends.
two thoughts on that, and I can't find my mouse, so I can't go back to my notes, but this is the other thing we all need to remember. I think I said that, like, you know, Harris won women by 12 or by 5 and Biden won by 12. Okay, that makes it sound like Harris lost the women's vote. What did I say? I said Harris's margin was +5. She won the vote of most women by a factor of by 5%. So whenever you hear those kind of plus minus, you got to remember that when somebody says, you know, somebody outperformed by 10, that doesn't mean that they didn't get a majority of the vote. So some of that ticket splitting really wasn't ticket splitting. It's, again, Americans math. We didn't understand the number. Some of the ticket splitting was, and we saw this, and this is one thing that was across the nation, across many of the states, and it happened here in Michigan too. On your pre-election bingo card, who had Trump winning all 50 states, all 7 swing states, and Slotkin in the United States Senate? I'll wait. Like that, you know, I understand some of you had Trump winning and Slotkin winning, but when I say Trump winning across the nation and all 7 swing states, the natural inclination is red wave. Slotkin's toast. So what we saw in a number of elections was the candidate quality really came through this year, and Slotkin's a great example. She ran a very tight campaign. Her messaging was Trump-esque in the sense of it was very short, very understandable, very targeted messages, not kind of a broad blunderbuss of Democratic speaking points. So she gamed that campaign brilliantly and was also a good candidate. And we saw that in several other Senate races. So kind of like the question earlier of was, you know, it was older voters to be, this was an election, I go back to what I said at the beginning, this is not an election where we can point to one group or groups or ticket splitting or something and say this is what won it for Trump. This is the election where we say a whole bunch of 40 and unders and the rest of America as well took a look at the last 4 years and in block moved to the right, slightly. Where I think the right is overreaching, and if I can get down to this one last. To the right, and again, if you're of a certain age, I'm going to quote Crocodile Dundee, this is not a mandate. Trump's win this year. That's a mandate. That's Reagan-Mondale. So this whole, you know, like, Trump won with a mandate. No, he didn't. Trump had a solid win. Why can't we just call it what it was? It was a solid win across the board. We don't need to jump to mandate. That's a mandate. So again, let's dial it down, everybody. We can't be all democracy on the ballot all the time. Let's pick and choose. And fortunately, you have a number of speakers coming up for the rest of your time today that will talk about those roles in advocacy and engagement and new tools. And you have some great people in the room, Joan, Regina, Kyle, Kelly, others, to help guide us as a sector in what comes next. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.